Hi, everyone. Mac Pierre here, attorney, mediator, and arbitrator. So, several years ago, I did a video on what is a child support review process negotiation conference, or what is the Texas Attorney General CSRP meeting, child support review process meeting. This video became one of the most popular videos on the website because it affected millions of people and their children. Every day around this country, lots of parents go to child support review meetings, and they basically work with a caseworker who helps them negotiate a child support review order. And that order allows the parties to come to agreement on child support, medical support, and sometimes provisions involving custody over their child. And this order allows the parties to not have to go to court and have a judge rule by force. So this video again became pretty popular. But one of the things that kept happening over the years was where parents would call the office and they would tell us that they went to a mediation with the Attorney General's office or the Department of Revenue, for example. And we'd always have to correct them and tell them, hey, listen, that wasn't a mediation. That was a child support review process negotiation meeting, which is legal and permissible and done every day around the country. However, because this issue kept coming up where parents would describe what they went through as a mediation, I wanted to take some time and actually do a video that discusses similarities and differences between mediation and the child support review process. Okay. So there are lots of similarities. First off, they offer an opportunity for people to negotiate a resolution to their case. So typically, every 3 years, both parents might get a letter, and the letter is basically going to be an invitation to come to the child support office and do a meeting to bring child support up or down, or establish child support for the first time. So it's either a modification or an establishment type of case. Just like that, in the mediation world, parents have the opportunity to go and negotiate a resolution to the problem. So between a CSRP and a mediation, they both have the same goal, which is to help people reach agreements over their disputes. So that's one similarity. Another similarity is that in each situation, each parent can bring a legal representative, like a lawyer. And so it's very common to see in a negotiation meeting with the Attorney General's office in Texas, anyway. Mom might bring her attorney, dad might bring his attorney, and they're there duking it out, arguing, talking, with the goal being let's come to an agreement that produces an order. Same thing with a mediation. The parties may bring their attorneys, and the mediator is there as a facilitator to help the parties come to an agreement. Next, in terms of time, something they have similarity between each other is that they may last for just a few hours, sometimes even as fast as 45 minutes. But these meetings are not intended to go on forever. They don't last days. They might be recessed, okay, for people to come back. But just like a mediation, a CSRP conference might last just a few hours. Next, the agreement is generally binding on the parties once they've signed off. In the case of a child support review meeting, it might need to first go to a judge and then become binding. But that is one big similarity between a mediation and a CSRP. Next, the mediations and the CSRPs, they have a very high efficiency rate in terms of settlements. So most meetings that happen between a caseworker and the parents or a mediator and the parents, most meetings will resolve itself and turn into a final order where everybody is happy and they go on their merry ways and they wait until the next time comes where the order needs to be changed. But that's one big similarity that they have between the two of them. Mediations and CSRP conferences have high settlement rates. And finally, one big similarity that they both have, mediations and CSRP conferences are only for the parties. Okay, so they're not made for your friends or for your parents to show up. These meetings are only for the parties and their attorneys. All right, now that we've discussed some similarities between mediations and child support review process negotiation conferences, let's now turn to some differences. So, some big differences, and this is why I I pause when people call and they refer to their CSRP meeting as a mediation because there's differences that actually make it not so. And these are what you need to know so you can make sure that you are going to the meeting that's going to best protect your rights and your interests. Number one, mediations are confidential with certain exceptions, such as maybe if a parent admits to harming a child or elderly person, that might need to be reported. But unlike mediations, which are strictly confidential, child support review process meetings, they may not be as confidential. Okay, you might be able to share some things that are discussed in a child support review meeting with the court, whereas in mediation, it's intentional that the meeting is confidential. Number two, mediators are impartial. So understand this. In a mediation, the mediator has no side. Their goal is to help you reach an agreement. But when you go to a CSRP meeting or a child support review process negotiation conference, know that the caseworker stands in the shoes of that state agency that is trying to do an order. That state agency represents the state, they have an interest. So you may find yourself going to a child support review meeting with an interested party being the negotiator who might one day turn out to be your prosecutor if you don't pay child support. So there's some conflicts there that exist that don't exist in the mediation space. So it's very important that you understand that while most caseworkers do a great job in not taking sides and they want to help the parties come into agreement, it's not the same as a mediator. A mediator is intentionally impartial, whereas the child support review process person who's helping you do your case might not uh, be as impartial as they should be. All right, number three, you need to show up for a mediation for it to occur. The mediation is not going to happen unless both parties show up to actually do the meeting. But child support review process or CSRP is a little different. If you don't show up to a child support review process meeting, especially in Texas, the state has the right to do a non-agreed order behind your back. And so you might need to show up if you don't want to have problems with an order that is later going to be served on you. So it's very important. If you're going to go to a mediation, know that nothing's going to happen unless the other side shows up as well to make a meeting happen, an order happen. But with a CSRP, if you don't show up, the other side does, they might be able to do an order anyway. So that could produce a whole lot of problems for the person who does not show up. Number four, another big difference is in terms of the scope. Mediation, the scope can cover basically anything that the parties want to cover, what the parties want to address. Whereas in the CSRP world, usually the scope is very limited to just the issues of child support and medical support. Sometimes it be child support arrearages. Okay. But it can't go. Most CSRPs do not go into fights over custody. They don't try to negotiate things involving which parent ought to have the child. Those kind of battles are reserved for mediation. Okay. So understand this big difference. This is probably one of the biggest differences, other than the confidentiality and the impartiality issues. This difference of scope is extremely important. When you go to mediation, you have a lot more flexibility in what you can talk about, what you can negotiate. Whereas child support world, you're really limited to those big five things. Okay. It's conservatorship or custody, who the child lives with. Usually that's already decided by the parent that is known as the custodial parent. Then there's possession and access, meaning what kind of schedule the other parent gets. then there's child support, then there's medical support, and then finally you're dealing with back child support arrearages. And so you're limited to those limited issues that if you can't agree, well, go to a judge. But in the mediation world, you can kind of talk about anything you want in order to get the agreement that makes you and the other side happy. All right, number five, child support. In the child support world, we have to talk about what is binding and what is not. If you go to a mediation, the mediation is binding on the parties once they've signed off on. All right. Generally speaking, in most jurisdictions, mediations are intentionally binding on the parties once they've agreed. You cannot change your mind the next day. Okay. The person who changes their mind takes a risk that the other person will be able to go to court and get a judgment on the agreement. But in the child support world, it's not the same kind of binding. In order that you've just entered into, you might be able to change your mind. You might be able to call the attorney general the next day and be like, hey, listen, I don't agree anymore. I need for you to scratch that order because I'm going to get myself a lawyer or I'm going to go to court. I'm going to fight this, yada, yada. Whereas in the mediation world, you can't do this kind of change of your mind. Okay. In a child support world, once you've done the order, then usually that order is going to go to the judge. And once the judge signs it, then it's binding. But before the judge signs it, there's always a possibility that you might be able to get out of that negotiated settlement agreement. So just know that big difference. Mediation is binding, whereas a child support review process order is not as binding. And finally, number six, the big difference, of course, is cost. Child support review process meeting is free. It doesn't cost anything. Whereas mediation usually will cost you something if you go to a private mediator. Of course, if you go to a community mediation organization where they do free mediations, or you go to a pro bono mediator, then no problem. You're going to be able to resolve your case, possibly with a mediator that charges you nothing. But most mediators do charge. Okay. So you have to know the difference. When you go to the child support review process, well, it's a great deal. You get the opportunity to sit down and talk to the other parent and make some kind of agreement where and nobody pays anything because the state's covering that cost. But if you go to a mediation, there might be a fee, but usually it's worth the fee since it's going to save you potentially thousands of dollars in legal bills since you're not litigating the case. All right. Lastly, just a couple points. Know that these two worlds of the mediation and the CSRP can sometimes intersect. Okay, imagine that you're at a CSRP conference with the Attorney General's office or the Department of Revenue in Florida, and you are discussing um, some terms and you're not feeling this, you have some concerns, and you want to cancel the meeting and go to an attorney's office. Well, a lot of times you could just bring up, hey, why don't we go to mediation instead, where the two worlds collide, where you could try to change your child support review process into a mediation. Now, you have to usually agree, but if both parents agree and they say, listen, I don't like the way this is going. I'd prefer to get a binding settlement agreement from an impartial mediator who's going to do this in a different type of environment. Then it's completely possible that you could go from a child support review process meeting to a mediation, especially if you want to cover more topics that will certainly not be covered in the child support review process. So, hope that clears it up. There's similarities between child support review process meetings and mediations, and there are big differences between the child support review process meetings and mediations. So, make sure you understand those differences and try to go to the meeting that helps you the most. All right, hope that was helpful. If you find this helpful, make sure you subscribe to the channel, instantmediations.com. And also, you can always visit me at oplawyers.org. That's O as in orange, P as in Paul, lawyers.org.